the news this week, NVIDIA is killing GeForce Experience and eventually its Control panel. It's going to consume both of them with a new software suite called NVAPP. In this episode, we'll investigate what app could possibly mean. Additionally, Intel responded to our video from a couple days ago where we revisited Intel Arc for 2024. That video contained benchmarks and talked about Intel's current positioning with its Arc GPUs. Overall, we were pretty positive on it. We had a couple of issues with Starfield and with GTA 5, and Intel actually had some updates for us, and we're going to share those with you today. They also had some future-looking statements that we're going to share. In other news, some leaks on AMD's 8000 GE series processors and news from Cooler Master about the NR200P. They're finally doing a version 2. Before that, this video is brought to you by Thermal Grizzly and the CryoSheet graphene pads. These CryoSheets are molecularly stacked in the Z-axis to encourage vertical direct thermal transfer from the IHS to the cooler. CryoSheet pads are made to be easily applicable for a thermal interface and completely avoid paste dryout because it's not paste. It makes them particularly useful for long service life systems with minimal maintenance. They come in multiple sizes for suitability on the most common laptops and desktop CPUs, and you can learn more at the Thermal Grizzly CryoSheets at the link in the description below. So first of all, Intel's Arc team sent us a note after publishing that. They sent us a quick thanks, and they also said they had some updates to share. Intel noted that regarding the Starfield performance results, it has been in communication with Bethesda and continues to be in communication with Bethesda, and it's continuing to try and optimize Arc with Starfield specifically. So Intel said that this is a particularly challenging title for them, partly because it's a moving target with how many updates Starfield's been pushing out. Intel also noted that it is continuing to work on this one and that it'll be a continual labor of love, which is a phrase they used for DirectX 11 updates some time ago as well. Now, the good news is that nobody cares about Starfield. The bad news is that AMD just got its FSR 3 update in Starfield. But this is about Intel right now. Other updates. So we saw poor performance in GTA 5 as compared to where it should have landed. It should have been almost 2 times higher frame rate in GTA 5 based on the performance in other games. And Intel's team investigated that, and they found specifically using MSAA with moderate to high settings for it hinders Intel Arc GPU performance in that game. So this is really interesting because it gets down to the details on driver optimization, where not only does a brand new from scratch driver team have to build per game, they sometimes also have to build per setting, which maybe gives some perspective for just how challenging it is and why no one has been successful in entering the GPU market besides NVIDIA and AMD. Maybe Intel will change that, but you're talking about this incumbent multi-billion-dollar corporation that has experience in CPUs. So to replicate that, it's not easy. You start getting down to individual settings, you can start to see why it's such a quagmire to try and build GPU drivers. Anyway, so the team said specifically using mid to high MSAA in GTA 5, that causes the performance issue. If you switch to FXAA or something else, or turn off anti-aliasing, it's not a problem as far as we understand. So again, it's a painstaking process to go game by game, sometimes setting by setting. It sounds like this may not be a thing they can fix for GTA, but Intel was very clear to say that this is not an MSAA specific issue with Arc because it works fine in other games. It's an MSAA and GTA specific issue with Arc. But it's good news that they can rapidly identify these because that was fast turnaround and speaks to the sort of driver patch list and why it's been so massive. For other updates, Intel said that it has now completed the transition fully from Dx9 and 12, which is what they were using. And we've actually covered this in the past, but it's kind of an update where they've fully integrated the Dx9 re-architecting of the drivers into the driver suite. That's why you see the better performance in most of the Dx9 games. And they're also finalizing their Dx11 architecture rework. For the Arc drivers, they will be flipping the switch on basically moving everything over to the new Dx11 architecture in their driver set. The Arc team further told us that it is next setting its sights on DirectX 12 updates. That's what it's going to be working on this year, where it has now moved to better support Dx9 games. Dx11 is kind of getting finalized as we film this, and then DX12 is next on that list. Overall, Intel's response here was good. They accepted the feedback, they took the criticisms with the praise, and came back with a plan for what they're doing for the rest of the year. And we'll continue benchmarking and revisiting ARC as the major updates roll out. So it may be a few drivers in between if we're kind of waiting for enough stuff to accumulate to really look into, but it sounds like DX11 is the next big place. You'll keep seeing updates, and then DX12 after that. Okay, next, NVIDIA is finally killing GeForce Experience and getting rid of the affliction that is their mandatory user login, which is something that we felt so strongly opposed to like a decade ago whenever they implemented it, that we completely abandoned GeForce Experience. But they're killing it, and they're going to be merging both the NVIDIA Control Panel and GeForce Experience, and actually RTX Studio as well. So all three will be merged into the same software suite, which will simply be called NVAPP. Now, the classic NVIDIA Control Panel looks like this, and it's old enough now to drink in the US. We're not sure the precise date that it launched. It got iterative updates, but there's evidence of its discussion at least dating back to 2003. On the unfortunate side, that means that once this transition to the new NVAPP is over, we'll lose the outdated looking but highly functional layout of the NVIDIA Control Panel. The new NVAPP just launched into public beta. We have some thoughts on it. We've tested it already. And during the beta period, both the control panel and GeForce Experience will remain functional and available. NVIDIA is not immediately killing either of those, but they're working towards it. And then specifically for NVIDIA Control Panel, that one's gonna be a little bit further out into the future. Functionality includes being able to install and update drivers, tweak global driver settings, manage individual game profiles, set up ShadowPlay, and customize a newly overhauled game overlay, and brand image management. The biggest update to this whole thing, because NVIDIA doesn't want to appear as if it's lagging behind AMD and Intel's more modern-looking software suites, both of which use a less 90s-esque looking skin. Now, additionally, the new NVIDIA app has quick install links to its other standalone software packages like Broadcast, Omniverse, and iCAD. But for us, we actually prefer the old hyperlink tree layout of the NVIDIA Control Panel, so as they continue to integrate that into NVAPP, hopefully they don't try to declutter it too much, because the hyperlink tree layout, it allows a certain density and functionality, and we'd be sorry to see that on the way out. Adding more clicks for the sake of decluttering and prettying up an interface can have adverse impact on navigability for users who know what they're doing. We've seen this with Windows updates over the years. Anyway, the intended install experience has the user first install the NVIDIA app, which then prompts the user to choose Game Ready or Studio drivers from a menu, and the software goes out to download the latest applicable driver version. We think NVIDIA wants to serve both its consumer and its professional customers on Quadro with the same control software. So it's been de-gamered, but it's only marginally less gamer. Still dark colors. That's gamer. Installing the press version of the app was extremely fast, but that's partly because it didn't include a driver and it couldn't do anything until a driver was separately installed. In practice, NVAPP is a reskin of GeForce Experience, but without a sign-in requirement, which just means that you don't have to give Jensen your email address. That's okay, he already knows it.
The result this time? ChatGPT.
That's why his leather jackets have so many pockets. He's just been storing your email addresses for years, only changing jackets when the pockets are full of note cards.
I wonder if this can play Crisis. Only gamers know that joke.
More features from the NVIDIA Control Panel side will be pulled over in time, but as of now, there's just a button at the bottom of the settings page that opens the old Control Panel. There are three reasons we access NVIDIA Control Panel. One is to change color and resolution settings, another is to toggle G-Sync, and finally, we, at GN tend to use it to select which GPUs can be assigned CUDA workloads. Of those, the G-Sync and CUDA settings have already been added to the new NVAPP. Some of these features, like many of the other settings, can be controlled through Windows control panels instead, like multi-monitor, audio, and refresh rate. But the NVIDIA Control Panel offers some additional functionality that can be useful for specific scenarios. Display and video settings still need to be moved from NVIDIA Control Panel as well, and are on NVIDIA's punch list for future improvements. They also have a few truly new things, so here's some of those. Starting with visual filters and the updated overlay, the RTX Dynamic Vibrance post-processing filter exists now to replace the legacy digital vibrance option in NCP. It looks fine in-game, adding saturation and pop to colors, but it really screws with the menu colors in Baldur's Gate 3. We didn't test a ton of games for this, but that one does have some issues. The potentially more useful RTX HDR filter is also new here, and this one uses, NVIDIA says, AI to automatically convert SDR games to HDR when an HDR display is connected. NVIDIA says that this should do a better job than Windows Auto HDR, but we haven't investigated this at the time. The rest of the old 2005 Logitech webcam-esque filters are carried over from GeForce Experience, like old film and watercolor. On the more useful side, ShadowPlay's capture functionality is slightly expanded by being able to go up to 120 FPS now, probably best suited to getting footage meant to end up as slow motion capture without sacrificing that fluidity. Upon launching Shadow of the Tomb Raider, GeForce Experience used to ask if we wanted to enable automatically recording highlights, but now NVAPP also offers a list of events that can be toggled individually. This one's kind of a reach to count as a new feature, but it's more of an expanded existing one. Finally, the performance overlay is more customizable, so now it can be repositioned easily. You can toggle on or off different functionalities. Statistics logging can be turned on without needing to download the separate Frame View app. That's pretty much it. We had more thoughts on this too. We wanted to just pack it into a news update. So reorganization appears to be the priority for this release. Up next, AMD is bringing out, allegedly, an 8000 GE lineup of lower power APUs. These should be 35 watts rather than the 65 watt rating that we saw for the other APUs we've looked at, the 8600Gs. The leak originates from ASUS, naturally, and it was found by Harukaze5719, also naturally. Now, this details some of the clock specs and some of the core specs for these APUs. So this table from ASUS, sourced via video cards found via Harukaze, we always cite all of the sources, shows the 8700GE at 3.65 gigahertz, down from 4.2 gigahertz on the 8700G base model. That's a huge reduction and is in step with the power drop. But that kind of a clock change could have a big impact on performance. Cache remains the same at 16 megabytes of L3, and core count is still 8 cores, we'd assume 16 threads. The 8600GE runs at 3.9 gigahertz, dropped from 4.35 gigahertz in the same table for the 8600G. The lowest end model is the 8300GE, which is a 4-core part at 35 watts with 8 megabytes of L3 cache and running at just 3.5 gigahertz for what Video Cards notes is the combined Zen 4 and Zen 4C cores and average base clock. What I'd really like to see is a new low-end $60 Athlon part. We historically always reviewed those. Actually, originally started because it was the only thing I could personally afford to buy when we were new to all of this. And so I looked at, I don't know what they even were at this point, but we looked at Athlons. And I remember the 200GE was in more recent years, but we haven't really had many since then. So AMD, get on it. Let's get some $60 new parts. Well, you basically buy like 3600s for about that price on eBay. But anyway, these parts are typically OEM only. You can get them for DIY use, but it does tend to require harvesting from pre-built machines. So maybe pre-harvested on eBay or something, but at that point, value is kind of questionable. Cooler Master has just announced officially the second version of its famous NR200P Mini ITX enclosure. This is a small form factor case, and the company only provided a single image for the launch, so we'll have to wait to give more detail on this. But here's the image. Don't blink, you'll miss it. Changes to the V2 versus the original includes shifting the motherboard lower within the case for more liquid cooler clearance in the top and fully committing to a vertical GPU layout without any horizontal PCIe slots. We're concerned about how close thick GPUs might end up to the side panel if the only option is tempered glass. Technically, the press release mentions vented steel panels, but it's not clear in the press release if that is an alternate swap to the glass or if that's somewhere else in the case or the rest of the case. The V2 supports GPUs up to 356 millimeters long and roughly 3.5 slots thick or 160 millimeters tall. Now, we've been adding to our catalog of ITX cases recently. This is definitely on the list to be looked at. A lot of you have requested the NR200P. We'll just wait for the V2 here and do that one. And we've been aggressively posting ITX case reviews as we continue to ramp that methodology, so you can find them on the channel. ATX, by the way, as a reminder, has finally been fully revamped, our testing methods for it, and it's underway. Posted a YouTube community thing about that. We are currently collecting data for it as I speak, actually. and we'll have a big methodology piece and some of the first reviews out of it in less than a month, actually, a couple weeks. If you haven't seen it, though, go and check out our Ncase M1 Evo review for the most recent ITX case review. And the NR200P will be next on our list. Okay, Lian Li just announced a ton of new products at what it calls its Digital Expo for 2024. We'll have our own CES, and it'll have cases and coolers. And apparently it took place in Batman's secret bunker. The shortest possible recap is this. Lian Li's SUP01 case is finally coming to the market and has a new approach to layout. They have a new liquid cooler that hides the tubes in a creative way. There's a power supply specifically for dual chamber cases like Lian Li makes, and there's a new desk PC case. We'll start with the SUP01. We covered this at Computex and found it to be Lian Li's most promising new case, deviating from the wide body design of the 11 series by presenting a narrower stand-up frame instead. The right side is full mesh, the left is glass, and the front is also mesh. Unique features include a front-mounted GPU that both visually presents it and grants it access to air intake, as plugged into a snaking riser cable, and then supported by up to 6 120 fans on the right side of the case with optional radiators. The SUP01 only comes with 3 pre-installed fans though, and you'll most definitely be using liquid coolers in this case because there's an extremely narrow motherboard compartment that maxes out at just 81 millimeters of cooler clearance. The case will ship in Q1 sometime for $150 and is a big departure from the comfort of Lian Li's 11 series. We'd keep an eye on VRM thermals for that motherboard, if not mounting any fans on that side of the compartment. Lian Li has also announced another collaboration with Dan Cases and debuted the A3. The A3 exits true SFF. It's 27 liters, so it is large-ish, but it does so to support ITX or micro ATX motherboards. The exterior is almost entirely fine mesh with a fabric mesh front panel for a mixed materials look. The size allows the A3 to support up to 10 120mm fans with 360 or 280mm radiator support in the top and left side panels, alongside power supply support up to 140mm long. So if you needed any reason that this is larger, those are the reasons. Use of an ATX power supply will limit the max GPU length and the max fan count. Currently, there's no release date. Price is supposed to be $70 though, and that's very competitive given the combination of features and compact design, and is reduced from the A4H2O price significantly, but competes in a larger class of case. Whether it's worth $70 will come down to the materials choices and the build quality. Lian Li also announced a back connect compatible O11 Vision for $130, kind of leaning into the motherboard trend, no launch date yet. And finally, there's an O11 Vision with chrome-plated glass, so reflective in other words, for $150. Next up is the Galahad 2 LCD Shift. This one won't get recalled. They promise. Again, the tubes are made of a very flexible spiral-ribbed tubing that Lian Li says is commonly used in liquid-cooled servers. The fittings on the radiator are 90-degree rotaries that allow for the tubes to be tucked down either side of the radiator, held in place with brackets, and covered with a plastic shroud. This naturally increases the effective width of the cooler, so case mounting hole support for 140mm wide fans is necessary despite it being a 360. Likewise, the radiator itself is 32mm thick, and fans are 28mm thick, making for a total package thickness of 60mm or so, which is on the larger side, and there's no release date yet on this one. In additional Lian Li news, they also showed their weird edge power supply with protrusions reorienting the cable terminals to face the same way as the fan, intended for use in dual chamber cases like the O11. This is supposed to make it easier to install and swap cables, and other features include a built-in internal USB hub, and like many of the others, this is a prototype without pricing at this time. Finally, Lian Li is working on this monstrosity. This is the DK07 desk PC case, which probably weighs an enormous amount, and it follows up several prior renditions over the years. The over-the-top, expensive approach won't stop here though, because the new desk case has a cooled or heated cup holder. It can do both. They've done it. They've figured out how to get into the American market. Cup holders built into the desk with heating and cooling. The first thing I would test is if the cup holder is compatible with a 30-ounce Big Gulp. So otherwise it has no place in the American market. It also has a wireless charging hub and built-in 30-inch transparent OLED monitor under the glass. It's equal parts cool and useless. And to give Lian Li some credit, it looks like this iteration finally provides a way to officially mount the monitors off the surface of the desk. Because by the time you got done with a monitor stand, a keyboard, a mouse pad on the glass, you were blocking a good portion of the view of the actual PC. Finally, they had another video, which was sort of a roundtable discussion type of thing, featuring CEO Jameson Chen. He's more of an engineer designer type of CEO rather than a money guy CEO. And so he drove a lot of this new direction that Lian Li has benefited from over the last several years. But they brought up the point of aluminum cases, where it used to be the case that Lian Li basically only shipped fully aluminum cases, and it was a quality commitment. And that was from back when Jameson Chen's father ran the company, and that was the direction they went. So the question came up of what happened to those, and will you make more? And Chen, the CEO, basically said that the company has moved away from full aluminum because of cost. It was simply too expensive in order to make something without the cost ballooning out of control and making it available to the wide market. So that was the answer to what happened to the aluminum cases. All right, next one. NVIDIA's proprietary CUDA parallel computing platform is used basically everywhere, but there's news on a potential alternative called ZLUDA, if we're gonna pronounce it. CUDA, if you don't know, so it gets leveraged in things like Adobe Premiere, use it in Photoshop, Blender, machine learning, finance, data analytics, and basically everything else. Solo developer Andrzej Janik has been working to create ZLUDA, or Level 0 CUDA, and this is intended to bring CUDA compatibility to AMD GPUs in an open source way. Intel was also briefly listed as being on that intent list. So according to the publication Phoronix, this endeavor originally started with Janik trying to get ZLUDA working on Intel hardware, and in fact, ultimately it fell through when Intel, which had hired him to do this, decided to kill the project. They halted the investments, and he was without a job for that. AMD then hired Janik to make ZLUDA work on its GPUs instead, where a similar trajectory took place. He spent 2 years trying to get it to run on AMD's ROCm stack, and that was without inviting any developers to adapt their source code to make it work. And unfortunately, history repeated at AMD, where once again the project was killed. But this time, there was one upside, which is that his contract stipulated there were certain conditions under which he could open source the code he had developed for them. And this was the good move. So Phoronix reports that this clause is what brings us to where we are today. And ZLUDA is open and available on AMD's hardware right now. Phoronix has been testing it and noting that it's been a, quote, positive experience. They also said this, quote, CUDA-enabled software is indeed running atop ROCm and without any changes. The ZLUDA implementation, though, isn't 100% fail-safe, as NVIDIA optics support not being fully supported, and some features such as software not using PTX assembly code isn't currently handled. Phoronix also points out some of the compatibility limitations, writing that ZLUDA on AMD GPUs still share some of the same inherent issues of ROCm in the officially supported hardware spectrum, not being as broad as NVIDIA with their all-out CUDA support. On the hardware front, the developer used RDNA 2 6000 series GPUs for development and testing. Phoronix used RDNA 3 7000 series GPUs, but noted that they were performing well despite not being, they called it, quote, the target or the primary target for hardware. They also used Linux for their testing, which is expected of Phoronix, but they noted that Windows should work as well. As for the developer, he has also tested ZLUDA on an array of CUDA-compatible software that includes Geekbench, Blender, Lamps, and NAMD, which are two of the software or benchmarks that we do from the Spec Workstation benchmark suite, and putting things through their paces. And some NAMD and Blender 4 tests in particular, Phoronix benchmarked some AMD cards, including the 7900XTX, 79XT, 68XT, 77XT, and 6800, against NVIDIA cards that included the 4080, 4070 Super, and 3080. AMD was surprisingly competitive. NVIDIA's cards took first, second, and third in the CUDA 2.14 test, and a pattern emerged in some Blender 4 tests, showing the 7900XTX consistently beating all of the aforementioned NVIDIA cards except the 4080. We'll leave the rest of the deep dive to the Phoronix website. You should just check out Phoronix in general if you never have, because the things that they do for the Linux benchmarking community is insane. It's really impressive what Phoronix has done. If you're into Linux at all and you haven't heard of them, you need to bookmark them immediately, because we've looked at a lot of their work for Linux over the years, and it's impressive. Wendell almost certainly gets some of his news from Phoronix as well. Okay, so if you're interested in that, it's available on GitHub. Let's move on to the next one. Up next, the Nintendo 64 came out 27 years ago and has long since been abandoned for publishing as a platform by Nintendo, but that hasn't stopped modders from continuing on it. Fun anecdote, I won my first Nintendo 64 through a Dexter's Lab call-in contest. If you remember the cartoon Dexter's Lab, they had a Cartoon Network thing. You could call the number, I think it was like the 14th caller won a Nintendo 64. And I was sitting there, and I thought I was pretty damn smart because I'd pre-typed the number. I would hit redial and hang up if it was a busy tone, and I got a note from Dexter himself. It's true. Anyway, Mario 64 modder and YouTuber Kaze Emanuar recently published a YouTube video highlighting how he and the N64 modding community have been working to overcome the system's biggest limitations that involve low polygon count, blurry textures, simple lighting, and janky character limb connections. After working on the N64 for 4 years, recently, Emanuar asserts that there were some developmental techniques that were overlooked. Also, knowledge of graphics has changed a lot since then. So to overcome these hurdles, he said you would need ingenious solutions and insane knowledge about the inner workings of the hardware. Improving upon the texture situation, he mentioned that the N64's texture cache was limited to 4 kilobytes in size, which was derided as a big system weakness. To skirt around this limitation, he leveraged loading 2 different textures at the same time on top of each other and used one texture to generate detail and the other to generate contrast. Another technique is to use one texture twice, but at different sizes to make repetitive tiling less obvious. While you'd think that using 2 textures at the same time might be more graphically intensive than using just one, he stated that due to a hardware quirk, that wasn't the case, and actually it performed better in some instances, meaning that leveraging this technique correctly, games can look and perform slightly better in some cases. The N64's graphics processor was called the Reality Signal Processor, or RSP. According to Emanuar, the RSP's microcode was inefficient in the first few years of the system's lifespan, but had more efficient revisions a few years into the lifecycle. In addition, the RSP was often underutilized, with developers opting to take the shortcut of going low poly rather than spending additional resources optimizing for high polygon count. On the lighting side, he mentioned that modders are experimenting with adding contemporary techniques like cell shading and ambient occlusion. On a more practical level, he mentions that the N64 uses a color combiner instead of a shader. Using math to calculate a pixel's color can generate an untapped reflectiveness. The modder notes that this aspect perhaps wasn't used because it was a combination of being good at math and at art. He finally spent some time addressing character animations and limbs which were connected with additional polygons that acted as sort of a glue between the joints that otherwise would look disconnected. The whole thing is really interesting. You should check out the video. We will link it below. It's very impressive what he and the community have been able to do with the N64's dated hardware. It's super. This is the kind of stuff we love seeing and reporting on, especially as a last story in news, because it's just cool to see what people can do with hardware, especially as it ages, and there's more information on it. We covered a similar approach to things recently when we showed a modder who had figured out how to convert audio from a game cartridge a crash back into data. So that's it for the news this week. Nintendo 64 stuff, probably the most powerful hardware out of everything we talked about today. Thanks for watching. As always, subscribe for more. You can go to store.gamersaccess.net to grab something like one of our t-shirts, our mod mats, or our coaster packs, or solder mats, or toolkits to help us out directly and get something useful in return. And go to gamersaccess.net to read some of our articles we've converted of our video reviews recently if you want quick reference material. Thanks for watching. We'll see you all next time.